Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into some malicious compliance stories. Today we've got 3 tales of people who didn't fight, didn't yell, and didn't escalate. They just let the consequences do the work. One involves a parking spot thief who volunteered too much information in Texas heat. Another, a nepotism hire who learned that keys don't grow on trees. And the last, a developer who tried to dictate flower colors in Canada. Which response was the most surgical, the most satisfying, or the most patriotic in red, white, and blue? Stick around until the end. We'll break them down and you can vote in the comments for the best story. Here we go. Texas heat, a stolen spot, and a guy who volunteered too much information. A few years ago, right in the middle of COVID, I made the tactical error of taking my entire family grocery shopping. My wife was heavily pregnant and we had 3 young kids in tow. It was one of those situations where logistics just didn't line up and leaving anyone home wasn't an option. So there we were, full circus, rolling into HEB on a Saturday afternoon. If you've ever been to Texas in the summer, you already know where this is going. It was easily 95 degrees outside, the kind of heat that feels personal. Inside a car with the windows up, you're looking at temperatures well north of 130 degrees in minutes. We were circling the packed parking lot, hoping for one of those expectant mother or with children spots near the entrance. Not because we feel entitled, but because pushing a stroller while herding a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old through traffic in that heat is a legitimate safety issue. As we turned down an aisle and spotted one of those spots up ahead, a guy coming from the opposite direction cut across in front of us and slid right into it. No hesitation, no signal, just a smooth, self-satisfied maneuver. I muttered something under my breath and kept driving. We ended up parking about 300 feet farther down the aisle. Not the end of the world, but it meant a longer, hotter walk through a busy lot with toddlers who don't fully grasp the concept of moving vehicles. As we got everyone out of the car, stroller unfolded and snacks redistributed, I noticed the guy still sitting in his vehicle. He'd apparently been in such a hurry to steal the spot that he needed 5 full minutes to gather himself before exiting. Eventually, he stepped out, locked the car, and started walking toward the store, cutting across in front of us. I wasn't looking for a fight. I just said evenly, "Hey, that parking is really meant for pregnant women and families with small kids." I was pushing a stroller, my wife clearly expecting, and our 2 older kids were weaving unpredictably beside us. It wasn't subtle. He barely slowed down and replied in a dismissive tone, "Yeah, the kids are in the car." That one sentence changed everything. He could have just shrugged and kept walking. Instead, he volunteered that there were kids in the car in Texas heat. Now it wasn't about a parking spot anymore. I stopped walking for half a second. "It's way too hot to leave kids in the car without air conditioning," I said. "That's not safe." We were nearing the front entrance by then. He waved a hand at me like I was a telemarketer and said, "They'll be fine. Don't worry about it." Then he kept walking. Now here's the thing. Whether he actually had kids in that car or not didn't matter at that point. If he did, that was a serious problem. If he didn't, he just casually lied about leaving children inside a parked car in Texas heat. Either way, he created his own issue. My wife and I were juggling 2 small kids from darting in front of SUVs while pushing a stroller in the sun because he wanted a closer walk. Those spaces exist for a reason. When we entered the store, I saw a manager near the front. I walked over and told her exactly what the man had said, word for word. I pointed him out and explained that I hadn't actually looked into his car, so I couldn't confirm whether there were children inside. I just repeated his statement and said I thought someone should be aware. HEB is practically a civic institution in Texas. They take their image and community responsibility very seriously. They're not going to shrug off a possible situation involving kids locked in a car in summer heat. The store often has a constable on site anyway. I wasn't exaggerating anything. I wasn't adding drama. I simply passed along what he'd said to me. The manager's expression shifted immediately. "Thank you," she said. "We'll look into it right away." That was it. I grabbed a cart and went about my shopping. My wife didn't ask for details, and I didn't provide them. If the guy had told the truth, then intervention was necessary. If he hadn't, well, that wasn't my problem. We took our time. It was about 25 minutes before we finished and headed back out into the oven-like parking lot. As we approached our car, I spotted him. He was standing next to his vehicle, gesturing animatedly while speaking to a uniformed constable. The officer did not look amused. The man's posture had lost all of its earlier swagger. I could hear the conversation, but I didn't need to. If there were kids in the car, he was being educated very firmly about why that's unacceptable. If there weren't, he was likely explaining why he told a stranger that there were. Either way, his own words had boomeranged back to him. I didn't gloat. I didn't stop to watch. I buckled my kids in, loaded the groceries, and closed the trunk. As I got into the driver's seat, I glanced over and caught his eye briefly. Recognition flickered across his face. I smiled politely. As I pulled away, I couldn't help thinking, he'll be fine. Don't worry about it. And our second story. Sometimes karma is a key in a trash can. When I was a senior in high school in the mid-1970s, I had what I thought was a pretty sweet summer job at a clothing store in our local mall. It was my second summer there, so I wasn't the clueless new kid folding sweaters into abstract shapes anymore. I knew how to run the register, how to upsell a belt with a pair of slacks, and most importantly, I was trusted to close the store at night. For a 17-year-old, that felt like a big deal. Responsibility meant you were valued, or at least that's what I believed at the time. Our closing routine was simple and, looking back, hilariously careless. At the end of the night, we'd pull down the heavy metal security gate across the entrance and lock it. Since there was only one key for the staff to share, we had a system. We'd hide the key under the bottom edge of the gate in a corner tucked just out of sight but easily reachable. The opening shift would crouch down, grab it, and unlock the store. The manager kept his own copy on his key ring, but for everyone else, that was the routine. Things were smooth until my manager, whom I'll call Ron, decided to hire his niece, Kelly. Kelly was around my age, but she had the confidence of someone who knew her job security didn't depend on performance. At first, I didn't think much of it. Then the schedule started shifting. My 5-day weeks became 4, then 3. Kelly's hours, meanwhile, steadily increased like she was climbing a corporate ladder made of nepotism. By midsummer, I was working fewer than 20 hours a week after having started out full-time. I cornered Ron one afternoon when the store was empty and asked what was going on. I told him I'd been reliable for 2 summers, that I'd closed the store without issue, and that I needed the hours. He didn't even try to soften it. He just shrugged and said, "Kelly needs the experience." I replied, "So do I. I've already been doing this job." That's when he looked at me and said, "If you don't like it, too bad. You can quit." So I did. The mall was full of shops looking for help, and within a week I had another job at a different clothing store just down the corridor. I didn't miss Ron's attitude, but I was still irritated by how easily I'd been pushed aside. It wasn't just about the hours, it was about the dismissiveness. Being told "too bad" after 2 years of loyalty tends to stick with you. I waited a few weeks, letting the sting settle into something colder and more patient. Then one evening, luck lined things up perfectly. Kelly was scheduled to close at my old store, and I was closing at my new one. I finished my duties, straightened racks, counted the till, and then lingered a bit. I wanted to be sure she had locked up and left before I made my move. When I was confident she was gone, I locked my own store and walked casually past my former workplace. The gate was down, the lights were off. I slowed just enough to crouch like I was adjusting my shoe, reached under the corner of the gate, and there it was, the key. Right where it had always been, waiting like a little metal opportunity. I slipped it into my hand and kept walking without breaking stride. Near the mall exit was a trash can by the doors leading to the parking lot. I dropped the key in like it was an empty soda cup and headed to my car. This was the 1970s. Security cameras weren't watching every square inch of retail space. No one stopped me. No one even noticed me. Some lessons don't need shouting. They just need a key to disappear. 2 years of loyalty and he told you "too bad." So you took that energy and turned it into a quiet, permanent inconvenience. The next morning, I opened my new store as usual. The mall came alive around 9, gates rattling up one by one, shoppers trickled in, and the air filled with that faint mix of perfume and popcorn. Across the walkway, my old store remained dark. 9:30 came and went, then 10. By 11, customers were peering through the gate, confused. Around noon, Ron stormed into the mall like a man who'd had his weekend ruined. I later learned he'd been out of town and had to drive back early because Kelly couldn't open the store without the shared key. Apparently, no one had considered what might happen if that key ever vanished. He unlocked the gate with his personal copy, looking like he'd swallowed something sour. Later that day, he marched over to my news store and asked to speak to me. He was red-faced and irritated, trying to keep his voice down but not succeeding. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about a missing key, would you?" he demanded. I blinked at him innocently and said, "No. Why would I?" He stared at me for a moment, then said, "It didn't just disappear." I shrugged and replied, "Maybe Kelly misplaced it. Sounds like she needs to be more responsible." He didn't have proof of anything, and he knew it. He muttered something under his breath and left, likely to invest in a second staff key at long last. I went back to folding shirts, feeling an odd sense of balance restored. It wasn't about causing chaos. It was about a reminder that carelessness and favoritism sometimes come with inconvenient consequences. From that point on, my old store kept its key on an actual key ring, not under a gate, and Ron never again told anyone, "Too bad, you can quit," like it was an unbeatable hand. And our last story. My new neighbors tried to create an HOA that included my already existing house. I bought my house in 2015, and at the time the idea of an HOA anywhere near me would have sounded like a joke someone told at a bad barbecue. I had the cemetery to the west, 5 acres of woodland to the north, one neighbor's house about 200 feet to the east, and my south side fronted onto a secondary highway with the land dropping off behind it. It was quiet enough to keep my husband happy in his "I would have liked to live inside a witness protection program" mindset, but not so remote that it felt like I'd have to send smoke signals if I needed help. For years it was perfect. No drama, no community standards, no clipboard people measuring the angle of my tulips. The biggest controversy on my road was whether the deer were getting bolder or the humans were getting dumber. Then 2021 hit, and the land parcel to the north sold to some numbered company, which is always a comforting sign. Nothing screams, "We're here to improve the community," like a name that sounds like a tax write-off. Not long after that, my one nearby neighbor, Mark, listed his house. A normal, decent man, he sold in early 2022 and later apologized when he realized what happened because the same numbered company bought his property too. They raised his house and outbuildings like they were clearing land for a moon base, then applied for rezoning. Fine, people develop land, that's life. I'm not sentimental about someone else's shed. Then the paperwork started. Subdivision plans, road allowances, water services. No wastewater service because this is a rural village and we aren't exactly swimming in municipal infrastructure. That meant septic systems, which means setbacks, which means rules. And those rules exist for a reason. Because septic mistakes don't stay politely on one property. They seep, they spread, they turn your backyard into a slow-motion environmental science experiment. I learned quickly that the developer's attitude was basically, rules are what happened to other people. The first notice I got was a variance application asking to place the septic beds closer to my property line than township bylaws allowed. Not because they couldn't fit the systems, but because they didn't feel like designing their lots around the reality that septic systems need room. I read it twice just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. I wasn't. They were actually asking for permission to shove something with potential environmental impact closer to my property because convenience. Then came notice number 2, legal notice to allow fencing to be built on the property line with half the linear cost assigned to my address. This one had me laughing out loud in my kitchen like a villain in a low-budget movie. For context, my township has no fence permit requirements, just height rules, 4 feet in front, 6 feet in back, and the usual don't put your fence on someone else's land. Also, unless you agree in writing beforehand, you don't get to slap a fence directly on the line and then send your neighbor an invoice like you're a contractor on a home reno show. So far, I'm dealing with septic shenanigans and fence fantasies. But then we reached the part where my soul briefly left my body. I received a notice from the developer's lawyers that I, as an adjacent property owner, would be required to abide by their neighborhood aesthetic requirements. I wish I was joking. This wasn't about the new builds. This wasn't about what future homeowners would sign up for. This was aimed at me in my paid-for house, bought without deed restrictions, long before their little subdivision dream existed. Their requirements included rules on house and garage colors, vehicles allowed on property, and, this is my favorite, what color flowers would be allowed in publicly visible flower beds. Specifically, red, white, and blue only. I live in Canada. I stared at that line for a full minute like it might rearrange itself into something that made sense. It did not. I can do red and white, sure, for being patriotic, but blue? What are we decorating for the 4th of July? They wanted to tell you what color flowers to plant in Canada? Red, white, and blue? The audacity is so absurd it almost loops back around to funny. Almost. That's when I realized what their real plan was. It wasn't just build houses, it was control the entire vibe. They were trying to bootstrap an HOA-like grip over neighboring properties by intimidation and paperwork volume. They were trying to bootstrap an HOA-like grip over neighboring properties by intimidation and paperwork volume. They assumed people would get tired, get confused, or get scared and just comply to avoid the hassle. They wanted to create the illusion of authority and see who folded first. Unfortunately for them, my name is Karen. Not Internet Karen, not I demand to speak to your manager because my latte is the wrong temperature Karen. I mean the original, factory standard 1967 version. The one my mother apparently named me for because she had a vision of the exact kind of person who would someday read a legal thread about flower colors and respond with the spiritual energy of a raccoon in a dumpster. You do not move next to my property and tell me what color my petunias are allowed to be. So when the update came around, the township council meeting on the 15th, I showed up. I sat through 2 hours of the most sleep-inducing municipal business imaginable. I listened to discussions that could make caffeine give up. And then, finally, it was the developer's turn to explain the septic variants. They did their little presentation, all polished and professional, and it boiled down to this. The septic bed would need to be raised due to water table heights, and they moved the septics farther back on the lots. It would leave more flat space between the houses and the septic beds. Why did they want more flat space? So future homeowners would have room for things like an above-ground swimming pool. A swimming pool on a quarter-acre lot as justification to move septic infrastructure closer to my property line? When council asked any objections to this variance request, I stood up. I didn't grandstand, I didn't rant, I didn't perform. I just stated the obvious in calm adult words. These are quarter-acre lots. There's no legitimate space issue, and wanting more room for toys is not a valid reason to override a setback rule designed to prevent environmental harm. I told them plainly that changing septic placement could have impact beyond the lot lines, and I wasn't interested in gambling my land and water on someone else's pool fantasies. Council didn't debate it for an hour. They didn't send it to a subcommittee. They didn't circle back. They looked at each other, looked at the developer, and said, variance denied. I walked out feeling lighter than I had in months. The developer didn't get their shortcut, the septic beds stayed where they're supposed to be, and the message was crystal clear. This isn't their little kingdom, and their paperwork doesn't magically rewrite my property rights. They can keep their red, white, and blue flower obsession. If they try to tell me what I'm allowed to plant, I'll make my entire front bed a glorious riot of purple and neon orange out of pure principle. Breaking down who walked away satisfied. Story 1 was the gift of loose lips. The guy could have just taken the spot and walked away. Instead, he offered up a detail that turned a parking dispute into a potential child safety issue. The OP didn't lie, didn't exaggerate, just passed along what he heard. 25 minutes later, a constable was having a very firm conversation in the parking lot. Story 2 was a key in a trash can. 2 years of reliable work, dismissed with, too bad, you can quit. So the OP quit and then waited. A few weeks later, that hidden key went for a walk. The next morning, a dark storefront, a confused niece, and a manager driving back from out of town. No proof, no confrontation, just a small permanent inconvenience that reminded everyone why you don't treat people like they're replaceable. But story 3 wins, not because of the parking spot or the key, though both were satisfying, but because of the audacity. The developer tried to tell a woman who bought her house in 2015 what color flowers she could plant. When that didn't work, they tried to move septic beds closer to her property so someone could have a swimming pool. So she showed up to council, spoke calmly, and watched their variance get denied in minutes. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.